Okay.
All right.
Great, thanks.
Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, the Women's Broadcast TV Network, WomenOnTV.tv, iTube 247 out of Franklin, Tennessee. And I've been waiting to interview John for a long time. And I had to have my friend Mike Szymanski on, fellow film critic. I had to have Jessica on, and I had to have Sherry on. So John, pronounce your name for everybody so they know who you are.
It's John Scheinfeld. It's like Seinfeld without the CH and without the money and the fame.
And Jessica out of Tennessee, she was right. So let's talk. I saw this, and
for the
so
EI.
John, you just
My lesson
into my top 5 filmmakers of all time with the stuff that you've done. And I saw it last night on Hulu, and you know, I wanted to start crying immediately because Garry was such a great person just to interview for us. And Mike, I know you've interviewed Garry Marshall many times throughout the years too. So
I did, and I actually
doing this. 5.6 million people that saw it on ABC, and now it's on Hulu. John, talk about what that feeling is like.
Well, it was really rewarding. You know, as a filmmaker, you spend 12 months sitting in a small, dark editing room, hoping you're doing good work, but you don't really know till it's unleashed on the public. And we are just totally gratified by the response we got. 5.6 million these days in network television is a great number. And we actually think it's going to rise when we get the +7 data coming in. A lot of us older folks, in quotes, tend to DVR and watch later. So I think that 7 day thing may very well push our numbers up. But it was just great. The response we got, the reviews we got, everybody sort of understood what it was we were trying to do, which was in this time of COVID-19, in this time of all the shitstorm coming out of Washington, it's just wonderful to be able to watch a show that makes you laugh, that touches your heart, and you leave feeling great.
Hey, Mike, do you remember the last time you talked to Garry? Because Garry always left a memorable feeling with. He was always so nice to us when he walked in to do interviews.
Yeah, and actually it was a more personal thing because I actually knew him through his theater in Burbank because I live very close to that in Toluca Lake, and I think it was when they reopened it or rededicated it for something, and I went to a play there, and he was at the red carpet, you know, had his like mini red carpet, but. There was the Garry Marshall Theater, and it was just wonderful to have this kind of home, small, you know, community theater that he loved so much and supported.
Well, I got to tell you, Garry was beloved by everybody that knew him, everybody that worked with him. In a year working on this project, I don't think I heard a bad word about him from anybody. Yeah. And, you know, we're in the business where snarkiness runs rampant, so not unusual if somebody would have had something to say, but they didn't, and we tried to capture that as well. He was a fascinating, somewhat complex guy with his eccentricities. We touched on it a little bit. I'll tell you a story that we didn't have time for in the documentary, but it's in the bonus material. Lowell Gans, big screenwriter, Parenthood, Splash, you know, you name it. He started as a junior writer on Garry's show, The Odd Couple. And he was so junior that they wouldn't let him park on the Paramount lot. He had to like park 3-4 blocks away on the street somewhere. And so after a particularly long night of writing session, Lowell is walking out the Paramount front gate to go get his car. And who drives up next to him but Garry, who he didn't know very well at the time. And Garry says, can I give you, you know, what's going on? He said, well, my car is parked on the street. Well, I'll give you a ride. So they get to the end of the driveway into Paramount, and Melrose Avenue is right there. And Lowell says, in telling me the story, he says, and then I said to Garry, the worst possible thing I could have said, turn left. The car stops, and there's dead silence. And Lowell isn't quite sure what he said that would create this response in Garry. And then Garry puts the car into park, and he finally says, you know, I don't do lefts. And it turns out he doesn't do left turns when he's driving. He's not comfortable, and Lowell didn't know it. So Garry would keep turning right to like get where he needed to go. And so funny guy, you know, and there were a lot of stories about his eccentricities like that.
Sherry, I know you want to ask a question out of Canada. So John, she's in Canada, so obviously Hulu's not there, so she didn't get a chance to see that. So Sherry, go ahead.
Yes, John, thank you for coming. I'm honored to be speaking with you. It seems, being that you're from the upper Midwest, the Illinois area, you are one of those men that come out to do stories that are more kind, that kind of show the true, gentler essence of the people that you profile. And will you be doing a documentary on Garry Marshall? Because I was reading about him, and I thought, you know how men don't like to ask for directions? With him not wanting to go left, that would be a really fun snippet within, if you ever did a biography of him. And it's one I would like to see, because I know that you're not that kind of guy that does the gotcha stories. You do bring out the essence of a man or a character that we all don't know as an entertainer. So I do hope it is something that you would plan to do.
Well, you'll probably need to edit this, Brian. We have done that, Sherry. That's it was on the air Tuesday night. That's the show that we did.
Oh, I apologize. I was unable to see it. I thought it was mostly just his work, but I thought maybe if you had an actor play him. I apologize.
Oh, sorry. No. Yeah, this was a documentary about Garry, but our approach was to look at it through the prism of his work. And what we really wanted to do was show the humor, the heart, and the humanity in both his work and in his personal life. And that's what the documentary is about. And we had interviews with all of his biggest stars, from Julia Roberts to Richard Gere to Anne Hathaway to Jennifer Garner to Henry Winkler to Ron Howard. We had 29 big stars in there talking about Garry. And so we learn a lot about his work, whether it was Happy Days or Laverne Shirley or Mork and Mindy, or then all of his movies, including Pretty Woman and the Princess Diaries. But we also then learn a bit about him, the man. We didn't have time in the 2 hours on ABC for everything, so that there's some bonus material out there on the ABC site that will give people a little bit extra to look at. So, but you're right. It was a profile the type of which I prefer to do, which is we're celebrating the best qualities of this man and his work. We're not doing gotcha. We're not doing dark and edgy. Rob Lowe says in his interview in the documentary that Garry didn't do dark, and I don't either. So there you go.
Well, that was my other question. I was curious, in your development of this, did you see quite a few parallels between you and him?
Well, that's interesting.
Yes, of your approach to subjects, or your outlook of, because Garry Marshall, he seems to be the man that, you know, he was a feel-good kind of guy that made you feel happy when you left the theater, or, you know, the TV show ended. And you, I think, are similar in the sense that, yeah, you're a happy being. And I liked when I read that when you were a child that you would take a radio upstairs and you'd hear the classics. And with today's day and age, with the iPhones and things like that, nobody closes their eyes and envisions in their mind the stimulus that music can bring. And I was curious with your biography of Garry, if you saw any parallels growing up with him that you encountered similar as he may have.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one very obvious parallel is we both went to Northwestern for college. And so I think we both took away some of that experience to become part of our life experience. So we share a little bit of that. But I think, yes, I think we're both the glass is more than half full kind of guy. And we would much rather entertain people than to do gotcha or dark or edgy stuff. So I think we very much share that. And I will say that what we tried to do with The Happy Days of Garry Marshall, this documentary, was to create a production that was very much in his spirit. So it wasn't me necessarily imposing my style onto his story. It was more I wanted to reflect his spirit in the way I told the story. And that was in a very positive, upbeat, inspiring, uplifting way. That's who he was, and that's what we were trying to do with this documentary. And what I try to do really with most of my material.
Hey,
Yeah.
John, did you do all the interviews for all this too?
Another good question. I do my own research. I prepare my own questions. I do all my own interviews. For this one, there was one exception. We've been trying to nail down a date with Julia Roberts for a very long time. And
Of course.
she was quite busy. But finally, she said, all right, here's the date, here's the time, and be there. And my wife and I were in France that day. So my producer, colleague, Dave Harding did the interview, but all the rest I did, yes.
So Jessica has actually performed a lot of, well, Jessica, I'll let you speak. Where have you performed Garry stuff?
Oh, wow. So I am a singer, dancer, actor, whatever. I love live stage theater, and I started singing on cruise ships in 2008 with Norwegian Cruise Line. And so we were discussing earlier before this started that I performed in a 70s show called Get Down Tonight, and we actually had a TV show section within that show. And so I did sing the Laverne Shirley theme song numerous times on 3 different contracts. Actually, I did that ship 3 times. So yeah, it's near and dear. But I love that stuff too. A heart for happy is I guess the way that you would describe me, I think.
Yeah, you bet. So does that mean you're going to sing it for us now?
Yes.
I mean, I could. Is that a request? I mean,
Yes,
I'll
that's
get
a
a request. Okay, let me see if I can get it again now.
You have to skip too. You have to do the skip.
Oh, the skip. It has to go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Shamil, Shamal, Haas and Pepper Incorporated. Da 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 da. I get Give us any chance, we'll take it. Read us any rule, we'll break it. We're gonna make our dreams come true. Doing it our way. Nothing's gonna turn us back now. Straight ahead and on the track now. We're gonna make our dreams come true. Doing it our way. I could go, but that won't.
You're so good.
Very good.
Hey,
Very
John,
good.
John, what did you learn that you didn't know about Garry?
I think there are a lot of things that I'd read his book, so I knew a lot of the story. I think, though, what I really learned was how beloved he was. I keep saying it, but it's so true. When you go after big celebrities to do interviews, a lot of times they won't do it, or they'll do it and they'll give you very perfunctory interviews or whatever. Yeah. This one, in some ways, even though I had bigger stars in this one than in some of the other films I've made, the booking was actually easier because so many people really wanted to be here talking about Garry. And when they came, it wasn't just the same old stories. It was great stories that they remembered that talked about how he had mentored them or elevated their careers or gave them their careers in the case of Anne Hathaway and Henry Winkler. And so I think to see that kind of feeling was something a little bit new for me, a little bit unusual. So I can't say, Brian, there were any, secrets or something like that. But I think to be able to see the journey that Garry went on professionally and personally, learned a bit about that. But all I think we were talking about it with Sherry before, that it's all about being positive, following your dream, not letting anybody tell you you can't. And so I was inspired by that. And so I guess that's something I learned. Near the end of the documentary, we have all of our stars talking about how it made them feel when Garry passed away. Yeah. And I debated, should that be in the film or not? And ultimately, it absolutely had to be there, because when you see all these famous faces getting so emotional when Garry was in the hospital and then when he passed away, it says without saying just how much he meant to them, just how important he was to them. And I think that gave us a big emotional quotient for the film. And if you have seen some of my other films, you know I always love to go for the emotion in addition to the laughs or the drama. And so that became very, very important. But again, Brian, coming back to it, I think it just, again, learning just how much he meant to all of these people. That was a lovely, lovely thing to see.
And talking about your other films, we have to mention In the Key of Joy, one of the best documentaries I've seen so far this year, because now, as Mike will tell you, it's hard to see these movies because there's no film festivals. So we got to talk about that. It debuted at Santa Barbara Film Festival. It's one of my best film festivals that I love to attend. This year I wasn't able to go, so I was invited to see John's film, In the Key of Joy, with Sergio Mendes, on the history of bringing Brazilian music, Brazil 66, into the U.S. John, talk about this.
Well, another one, very uplifting, very inspiring, very joyful, hence the title of the film. You can't watch this film and you can't listen to Sergio Mendes's music without just feeling joyful, because that's what it does for you. So Brian, after we did the screening in Santa Barbara, as you know, we did the screening at the Grammy Museum. And then we were going to do some kind of theatrical in late spring, early summer. But the virus has stopped all of that. So as it has for most films, with the Sergio film, it's been postponed. So we don't quite know when it will be available, when it will be out and able to be seen by people. But also, we're not quite sure in what format. Will it be theaters? Will it be streaming? Will it be cable? We just don't know right now. I think the business is in such a state of flux, we may not know for some weeks or some months.
I still say Showtime. I stick to my hat. I still say Showtime.
Well, thank you. We certainly would love to see it there. I'm very proud of that one, too. Actually, you know, I sound terrible. I really sound like a Pollyanna, like Garry Marshall is. But I don't take on a project unless I really love the subject, have a passion for the subject, or the subject nurtures my soul or makes me laugh. And Sergio his music has always been very inspiring for me. And like most of the things I do, I'm very proud of it. So I'm very proud of Sergio Mendes in the Key of Joy. And I really can't wait to unleash it on the world. But I think all of us who do what we do can't do it right now. And we'll have to wait and see when it will be possible.
Hey, like I said, I'm not going to stop talking about it because it is a wonderful film on a true artist who brought a different type of bossa nova music into the U.S., which had never been here before. That's groundbreaking, and that's history. What do people like now? Latin music, no matter where you go. It's just great.
You bet. You bet. Thank you for saying so. Exactly. We tried to capture that in the film, and hopefully we did.
But here's another thing, and not to give anything about the film because the other people haven't seen it yet, but you have one person in there that an interview that you did. All I'll say is just Harrison Ford.
Well, I want to make people see it, but in most of my films, I like to have somebody that I interview, where people like you or people that come to see it in the theater or screen it on TV, that they say, what the heck are they doing in this film, you know? And Harrison Ford is in the Sergio Mendes doc, and I won't spoil it for you, but there's a great story from before Harrison Ford was Harrison Ford the star. And we got him to tell it, and he did it with such joy and pleasure because he doesn't get to talk about that time in his life very often. So it was really a very special moment in the film. But I will say, while we're talking about Garry Marshall, it is available now on Hulu, and it's also available on ABC on their website on demand. You can watch it for free. Happy Days of Garry Marshall. I'm very proud of that, and I hope your viewers will get a chance to see it as well.
Sherry, can you get ABC in Canada?
Unfortunately, we can't access those. The government has this Canadian content rule, so we get minimal, unfortunately. So hopefully when the border opens, I'll be crossing down to see it. But I was curious also, getting back to, you like to profile characters that give you stimulus of your mind. When you decide on a person, do you like to do your own research, like put the puzzle pieces together, or does it generally stem from a biography you've read on an individual? How do you decide, of so many individuals in our history or our current state, what draws you to them to want to profile?
Yeah, you have a couple of good questions in there, so I'll take them one by one. How I decide to take on a project is, does it inspire me? Does it nurture my soul? Does it make me laugh? And is it a good story? Because I'm a story guy. So it's like, what's the story? Is it a good story? Can it sustain a feature-length telling? So that's the first thing. But then, yes, I do all my own research. I don't really use biographies or anything like that. I want to sort of determine what the landscape is, what the story is, and then figure out how best I want to tell it. And I think the thing is, if you interview 10 different documentary filmmakers, you're going to find 10 different ways to tell the story, because we all have our own style, our own way of telling a story. So that's why it really has to be my own. So what I'll do is I'll do my own research. I'll kind of come up with a take of or a vision for what I want the film to be. And then I try to figure out, all right, who's best to interview to help tell that story and to take that particular approach. But then another real challenging element of putting a documentary together is, do you have the audio-visual material with which to tell the story? Because if you're going to do a scripted feature film, you have a script, you have actors, that's all you need. But for a documentary, because you're telling the real story, it's like, do I have photographs? Do I have home movies? Do I have footage of any kind? So for the Happy Days of Garry Marshall being a good example, I actually secretly think Garry thought someone was going to make a documentary about him at some point, because he was a real saver. He saved everything. The family had scrapbooks for every year in his career with photos and stories and this and that. He had bound scripts, he had photos, he had video, he had film, he had so much. So we actually had far more than we could possibly use for this one. But film becomes very important. So let's go to, I'll tell a story about a film I made a couple of years ago called Chasing Train, John Coltrane documentary. He never did any television interviews, only did a handful of radio interviews. And so although I wanted him to have a real presence in the film, there was precious little outside of photographs to use. But he had done a lot of print interviews. So I took extracts from those and I peppered them throughout the film to help inform what he might have been thinking or feeling at a particular time in the story. And I decided I wanted a movie star to speak the words of Coltrane, and ended up, long story short, I ended up getting Denzel Washington, and he spoke the words. And that was a very important element. But another thing about Coltrane is there was no known footage of him in the studio. Lots of photos of him recording, but no footage. So imagine how excited I got. I was in New Jersey at the home of a world-class photographer named Chuck Stewart, who had shot a lot of photographs of musicians in the 50s and 60s, Coltrane included. But I didn't want just his 10 famous shots about Coltrane. I wanted to see his contact sheets and his negatives. So we had a stack of those, and I'm kind of going through them. And I must have, said, "Oh shit," or something like that, because my line producer, Dave, is next to me, and he says, "What?" And I said, "Look at this photograph." And he said, it's like Coltrane and some guy in the studio. So what? I said, look what the guy has in his hand. And it was a Super 8 movie camera. So what am I thinking? He shot some footage of Coltrane in the studio. So we had our researcher, Kiku, track down the guy, but sadly the guy had passed away a few years ago. But his son was an insurance broker who lived about 15 minutes from my house here in Los Angeles. So we called him up. We said, here's who we are. Here's what we're doing. And he said, oh, yeah, I got all the home movies in a box in the garage. He got them when his dad passed away, but he never looked at them. So we went out, we looked at them all, and there was a 7-minute color roll of Super 8 film, no sound, but film, of Coltrane recording in the studio, and that went into the film. So to use your word, Sherry, when I'm putting together the pieces of the puzzle, the audiovisual is very important. And I always like to have very super rare or rarely seen material that we can put into it. So with Garry, when you see the show, we have as many clips from the actual films and television shows as we do outtakes and gag reel stuff. And so we wanted to keep things very fresh and alive and have people see some things perhaps they hadn't seen before.
Hey, Mike, you got about 2 minutes. I figured you had a question.
Me?
Yeah, we got about 2 minutes. I knew you wanted to ask him something.
I had a really quick question because I'm from the generation that would talk to Garry about Happy Days and Laverne Shirley because I love that and I grew up with those. And when I one time asked him what most people asked him about, and he said, from your generation, it's Happy Days, it's the TV shows. But he was surprised that generationally, all ages would ask him about Princess Bride. That was the movie, the thing that they asked him the most. Did you find that? What do you think is his legacy? And did you find anything surprising from just the general public of what they think of Garry Marshall?
Well, I think you asked a really good question, and it's something that we addressed really early on in production. Was it just wasn't going to be a history of Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy. It wasn't just going to be a couple of his movies. We wanted to encompass all of it, and I think I wanted to make sure we could bring in an audience so that would know different parts of his career, but maybe not the rest. So we have older folks who remember the TV shows, but maybe they didn't know the movies quite as well, although everybody knows Pretty Woman. So we did that, but then by bringing in Princess Diaries and some of the other movies, we were able to bring in the younger stars like Anne Hathaway and Kate Hudson and other people, and they would hopefully bring an audience in who knows those movies, but maybe they didn't know the TV shows. So what I tried to do was sort of tread a very thin tightrope here, where we could have the TV shows on one side, the movies on the other, and that everybody would be with us up on that tightrope, kind of interested to learn about all of it.
Jessica, I'm going to let you ask the last question to John. We got about 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Oh my goodness. I heard in one of your interviews online, you considered yourself a treasure hunter. Have you always felt that way about yourself? Was that something that you've been interested in? You're just always curious about knowledge, or was that something that kind of transpired as you got older, maybe at Northwestern? Too much.
That's a great question. That's a great question. I will embarrass myself by answering it. When I was a kid, I was a holy terror. At home, I would go through my parents' drawers and desk drawers and dresser drawers just to see what was in it because I was so curious.
You sound like me.
And then when I was about 10 years old, we had a block party, and I wandered into our neighbor's house and started going through their drawers. And they said, "Why is Johnny doing that?" You know. But I think part of what makes a documentary filmmaker is curiosity. Curiosity about people, about things, about how the world works, about how material has come together to create something, whatever it might be. And I think from a very early age, I was really a very curious person and continue to be. And I think something that perhaps I can't speak for other filmmakers. I can only speak for me. But I think that impacts how I make a film. Is I approach it like a real person, like a fan, and so the kind of questions I'm asking are, I hope, the kind of questions that people watching the documentary would want the answers to, and not some highfalutin, complex thing. So I think a long, embarrassing answer to your question is be curious, and that's kind of what has driven me as a person and as a filmmaker.
All right, I want to thank everybody. Sherry out of Canada, Jessica out of Tennessee, Mike out of Los Angeles. I'm in Vegas right now. John, one of these days we have to do a part 2 if you don't mind, when you have time, because we want to go back into your past films. But for now, you can watch the Garry Marshall, the documentary on that on Hulu. It's very, very good, very touching, and it's just a wonderful film. I want to thank you for that. This is Brian Sebastian, Movie Reviews and More, the Women's Broadcast TV Network, WomenOnTV.tv, and iTube 247 out of Tennessee. We will see you next.